All right, so we're going to talk about the organization, like the physiology of the spinal cord. And normally in class, I would draw this out on the board. So I don't have that luxury. So I'm going to talk very closely on the two images here. So you guys are going to need to know how the neurons come into the spinal cord and leave the spinal cord. So let's please pay attention, and we're going to get going here. So notice this is sensory information. Okay, so sensory information coming from your body, any kind of sense, comes into the dorsal side of your spinal cord. Okay, so the nerves are going to come into the back of the spinal cord. So let's take a look at the purple one first. Okay, so from the back of your body, the purple, what's going to happen is let's first talk about some very basic things. I'm so sorry. Let's talk about, forgot to mention these things. Okay, these are your roots, right? So we talked about how we have the ventral root on the front of the spinal cord and the dorsal root on the back of the spinal cord. When those roots come together, they're going to form a spinal nerve. Okay, so so let's see if this one's better. Yeah, there's a spinal nerve right here. Notice that there is a little difference between the dorsal root and the ventral root. The dorsal root contains a ganglion. A ganglion is an enlargement that contains cell bodies of neurons, okay? So it's bigger because we have to have more room for the bodies of the neurons. Anything you see here, these lines, those are going to contain the long processes, axons and dendrites, or namely axons of these nerves. Okay, so the ventral root and the dorsal root having a ganglion, called the dorsal root ganglion, when they meet, okay, they're going to have that's the beginning of the spinal nerve. Then you can see that the spinal nerve splits immediately, okay? And so the spinal nerve will have branches that go to the anterior side of your body and to the dorsal side of your body, okay? So in this picture, this is the dorsal side is here, right, towards the front of this image. So this little guy, this is going to be the dorsal ramus. The word ramus is branch, okay? Ventral ramus of that same spinal nerve. Okay, so once again, we have the ventral root and dorsal root coming together to form the spinal nerve. The spinal nerve will split so that that same spinal nerve can go and serve the front of your body via the ventral ramus and the back of your body via the dorsal ramus. Okay, so now let's look at this and look at the same thing. So here we have the ventral root, here we have the dorsal root. When they meet, it's wrapped with meninges or with connective tissue right here, so you can't really tell exactly when they meet, but it's going to meet here, right here. And this point here where my cursor is would be called the spinal nerve. The spinal nerve is going to split immediately, okay? So we have the larger branch, the ventral ramus here, right on the other side we can see it, ventral ramus. And then the smaller branch goes to the back. This is the dorsal ramus, okay? Now, there is this structure here, which I'm going to talk about. These branches off the ventral ramus, this is going to come into another ganglion. So remember, this is a collection of cell bodies for the autonomic response. You have your sympathetic ganglion here. Remember, your sympathetic division was fight or flight. So if you need to set up a fight or flight response in the body, the messages will come down the spinal cord. They're going to exit and they're going to shoot in the impulses are going to shoot down these branches, come into the autonomic ganglion. I call it the sympathetic ganglion. And then from there, it'll go to the viscera of your body. It'll go to your heart. It'll go to your bladder, your digestive system. It'll go to your adrenal glands. And so that's that. Okay, so let's go back to our initial image here. Okay, So sensation, we're going to have some kind of sensation coming from the back of your body. When that sensation comes in, it's going to travel, if it's coming from the back of your body, right, it's going to come in from the dorsal ramus. If it's coming from the front of your body, it's going to be coming from the ventral ramus. And the two rami will come together, and then it will come in. So we're keeping our eye on the purple, and then here is the cell body of that neuron, right? So the senses that come from the back of your body, whatever that sense is, let's say it's temperature, it's going to have the body of that neuron here. So remember how sensory neurons are pseudo-unipolar in shape? So this, you can actually see that here. So we have the body, we have a little connection, and we have two very long processes off either side. So our sensory neurons here, so the dorsal root ganglion, right, have the bodies of sensory neurons. So then that impulse will travel into the spinal cord. It will land into the dorsal horn. Okay. Now, in the dorsal horn, you're going to have all kinds of interneurons. Remember, interneurons are neurons that are going to connect messages from one neuron to another. Those interneurons will then just send messages to the appropriate tract and then up to the brain. Okay, so if you wanted to add some information here, you would put a line here and put interneurons are found in the dorsal horn. Color just represents other receptors, sensory receptors coming from the back and from the front. So the difference between interoceptors and exteroreceptors is this is just going to be from your internal body organs, and this one's going to be from the outer, the somatic sort of parts of your body, the skin, the bones, and the muscles. So it's going to also come in, if it's from the back of your body, it flows into the dorsal ramus. If it's from the front of the body, it comes in through the ventral ramus. They meet, and then it goes back. So we're going to follow the dorsal root. We have the ganglion, so we have the dorsal root ganglion with the soma of that sensory neuron. That sensory neuron sends that axon into the dorsal horn. There's going to be an interneuron to receive that message and then to make a synapse with another neuron to go to the brain. Okay, so the message here is basically sensory information when it comes from the back of your body travels into the dorsal ramus. Sensory information from the front of your body will travel into the ventral ramus. They both will take the dorsal root back into the dorsal horn. And the cell bodies of your sensory neurons are found in that dorsal root ganglion. Okay, so that's it. Motor commands are going to leave the anterior side. Okay, so let's take a look here. So in this region, look at the shape here, right? So this diamond, this is the soma of a motor neuron. This red diamond is the soma of a motor neuron. So the cell bodies of your motor neurons are actually inside the anterior horn of your spinal cord, okay, or ventral horn of your spinal cord. When you want to move your body, right, so let's say we want to move the somatic, we want to move skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscle that's located on the back, so let's say we want to move our trapezius muscle, this motor neuron is going to send an impulse. The impulse is going to travel down its axon. It's going to travel, right, the axon is going to be found in the ventral root, come to the spinal nerve, and then head down the dorsal ramus, that dorsal branch, to the muscles in the back. Another motor neuron might control some anterior muscle, so maybe you want to do a sit-up and you're going to flex your rectus abdominis muscle on the anterior side. Another neuron will generate that impulse. It'll travel in the ventral root, come here to create the spinal nerve, and then follow the ventral ramus into the front of your body. Okay, so if we look at both of these together, so in class I would superimpose them so you'd have everything in one picture. But in class I would say, what kind of fibers do you find in the dorsal root? And you would say sensory fibers, right? Only sensory fibers are found in the dorsal root. What about the ventral root? What kind of fibers run through the ventral root? Only motor. right? Only motor fibers are here. But when we get to the spinal nerve here, we have motor fibers here, and we have sensory fibers here, right? So this is going to be the nerve. So the nerve is going to be mixed. So it'll contain sensory information, sensory fibers, as well as motor fibers. The rami are also mixed because I can use the ramus for motor commands going out, and I can also use that dorsal ramus for sensory information coming in. Same thing with the anterior side. So the overall picture is rami are mixed. Mixed meaning that they have both sensory and motor information traveling through them. The spinal nerve is mixed because you're going to have sensory fibers and motor fibers running through it. However, when we get to the roots, they are not mixed. The dorsal root only contains sensory fibers. The ventral root only contains motor fibers. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. You should be able to answer questions such as, what kind of fibers do you find in the dorsal root? What do you find in the dorsal root ganglion? Are rami mixed? Are roots mixed? Okay. So let's take a look at this last little piece. This is the sympathetic ganglion I was talking about. So in order for the commands to reach the neurons that set up a fight or flight response, the ganglion here, right, this is where the soma of your sympathetic neurons live. And you can see that the extensions are in either direction here. So this is complicated. There's actually a whole chapter on this autonomic response, so I'm not going to worry about what's in these connections. All I want you guys to know is that the rami communicantes, there's two tracks together, they're known as the rami communicantes. They're going to connect that sympathetic ganglion in with the spinal cord. Okay, so this is just the branch leading to the sympathetic ganglion. And then the sympathetic nerve will go away, and you can go to all those different parts of your body to set up a fight or flight response. Okay, but all you need to know is this is the sympathetic ganglion. There are sympathetic neuron cell bodies here, and these branches are called the rami communicantes, right? And so they help communicate the spinal cord with the sympathetic response. All right. So I think that's it with this part. So we would have drawn that out in class. So hopefully, I don't actually have a lot of written information in the outlines on this. So read all about it in your textbook. But if you took notes on just what I just said, and if you can draw this out, then you're in very, very good shape. Don't worry about all the details here, but just know basically sensory flows to the back, and then motor comes out the front. And I know I have some questions here. So destruction of the ventral horn cells of the spinal cord results in a loss of what? So remember, the ventral horn is the anterior, right, the front, gray matter. What lives there? Okay, so if you don't remember, let's look at the picture. What is in our ventral horn? Oh, these are the bodies of our motor neurons, right? I actually have another picture. Yeah, this is a reflex arc, but this also shows you that. So in the ventral horn, we have the body of our motor neuron. The motor neuron will then send its long axon to innervate with the muscle. So the answer to that question is, if you lose those ventral horn cells, what do you lose? You're going to lose motor control, right? The next one is paired structures that contain cell bodies of sensory neurons are. So what is it that contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons? Let's look at the picture. Maybe you answered it already. But let's look at this. This is a very simple picture. So here's our sensory neuron in red. We have some receptor on the end, comes in. Oh, there's our body. What is this structure called? That's called the dorsal root ganglion. Okay, so the answer here is letter C, the dorsal root ganglion. In class, sometimes the word paired throws people. But remember that you're looking at, in these pictures, you're just looking at one side of the spinal cord in this picture, right? This side's grayed out because this would be too much information, but this is mirror imaged over here, right? So there's another dorsal root ganglion here as well as here. So there's a pair of them. So that is the answer to the second question. It's the dorsal root ganglion. Spinal nerves are mixed nerves because, what is the correct answer here? You should pick A. When you hear the word mixed, it's because it contains both sensory and motor fibers. Remember, the word fibers is the long axon of a neuron. Okay, I'm going to end it there.